All right, welcome back. Dr. Brent McQuaid, Critical Care Director for Cone Health, is here answering your COVID-19 related questions. So have the COVID symptoms changed with the newer variants? Before it was like you knew you had COVID if you lost your taste and smell.
In general, the symptoms that people are experiencing are similar. It feels like you got a really bad virus. What does that mean? You've got body aches, people are experiencing upper respiratory complaints, a sore throat, cough, runny nose, fever still fairly common. So in general, there hasn't been a major shift in the majority of symptoms that people are experiencing. What has changed is that we're seeing much less severe illness, right? So we're not seeing nearly as much pneumonia from COVID and things like that we saw early on.
All right, what about the length of time that someone might experience symptoms with these newer variants?
Again, in general, there's a lot of folks that are asymptomatic or just have very mild illness. So when you look at the whole population, in general, people are not as sick and for not as long as prior. That being said, there are still exceptions of patients who are experiencing very long symptoms, who are experiencing severe illness. And so that's something that we still see in the hospital from time to time, not as often as before, but we'll still see folks who have symptoms that last for, over a week sometimes.
Yeah, we've got one text question that this person says, I've had COVID. I'm now on day 10 of symptoms. They're improving, but am I still at risk of getting any worse symptoms?
Unlikely not. That being said, since it's improving, it's unlikely that it's going to get worse. That being said, when you have any sort of viral infection like that, or pneumonia, bacterial infection, it takes a hit on your body's immune system. And as you're recovering, you're actually at risk for other infections. And so, do I think that it's likely that person's COVID's going to get worse? No, probably not, because they're getting better. But could they get something else? It's possible, because they're in a weakened state right now.
You mean like bronchitis or something of that nature?
That's right. That's
okay.
right. Yeah. Another respiratory illness. Yeah.
Okay. Can people still experience the long COVID with the newer variants compared to the older ones? Are we still seeing a lot of long haul people with these new variants?
In general, it's less frequent than what we saw early on. So we know that the patients who were more likely to experience long COVID, so in other words, really persistent symptoms that happened after they had COVID, were those patients who were very ill at the beginning of the illness. And when I say very ill, what do I mean? I mean like my patients. I'm an ICU doctor. So if you were in the ICU and you had multiple organs that were shutting down, your lungs were severely damaged, your kidneys were damaged, maybe your heart, you were at a much higher risk of developing long COVID. Now that in general, the virus is not as virulent as it was previously, the likelihood of developing long COVID like we saw earlier in the pandemic is less likely.
This person's asking, if you've had the COVID bivalent booster, is a follow-up bivalent booster recommended after a certain amount of time?
So that's one where even when I check the CDC website on that, what I would say is let's confer with a pharmacist. So once you've completed your primary series and you've had your bivalent vaccine, at that point, I believe you've received the booster that you need. And so I'm going to play that card right now and say, let's check with a pharmacist about that one. So sorry, I can't answer that one perfectly, but that's, I'd want to make sure that I'm giving out the best advice. I'd want to check with them.
It's never bad to ask another professional, right? Who is the expert in that, who's the one who's actually giving all of those vaccines. All right.
Yeah, and our pharmacists are great here at Cone. They help me all the time. So.
All right. So if someone says that they're experiencing long COVID, should they do something different?
Well, you really ought to go talk to your primary care doctor, right? Because if people are still feeling symptoms, weeks after they had and recovered from the initial illness of COVID, they may be thinking, oh, I have long COVID. There's lots of bad things that happen to people after they've been sick. And what I mean is that, could it be long COVID that's making you feel that way? Well, it's possible, but if you still feel bad, you ought to go talk to your doctor about it, right? Maybe you developed another problem. One thing we know in practicing medicine in a population like ours, where there's a lot of chronic illness, is that there's a lot of things that can make people feel badly.
Hmm.
And so if you're still feeling badly, weeks afterwards, go get checked out. Don't just assume you know what it is. Like if you feel pretty rough, go talk to your primary care doctor about it.